So the title of our project is Poverty and Employment Precarity in Southern Ontario, or otherwise known as PEPSO, that Brian referred to earlier. Grace Edward Galabuzzi is the PI, and he gives his apologies. He was not able to be here today, but he did send me his portion to read. I'm going to speak very quickly because there's not very much time to talk about a lot. I wanted to start with, it's probably quite apt that I'm on $6.65 a day as a fundraiser for Five House, which provides housing for HIV, people living with HIV. And I'm looking forward to Sunday when it's over. $6.65 allowance for food on the disability support program in Ontario is not very much. So I first point you to everybody that's on this team. I'm not going to go through it, but I'm the researcher from Ryerson, and you can see we're working with Peel, Hamilton, and Toronto. The project description. This project brings together a group of academic and community researchers who, in the first phase of the research, engaged in a photo voice study, and some of that photo voice perhaps some of you have seen. We've had exhibits around Ontario. And just demonstrate the kind of precarity that people live in Southern Ontario, and puts the experiences in the voices of the community researchers. Today we'll also discuss some of the recommendations based on the personal experiences narrated through those photographed images. I'll provide a brief, very brief example of a broader neighborhood perspective. Today, I'm a sociologist, so I'm always looking at how people experience social issues. And then finally, I'll read Grace Edwards' presentation on the work that's ongoing. The PEPSO case study 5 is Peel, Toronto, and Hamilton, and these are the specific neighborhoods that we're in. The key research questions are: how does precarious employment affect, good or bad, your livelihood and your neighborhood? That's the first question we asked. The second question was, what changes have you noticed in your neighborhood as a result of precarious employment? And thirdly, what resources are available in your neighborhood, for example, experiencing precarious conditions, food banks, employment counseling, and so on. The research objectives, and I'll spend a little bit of time on this, is first to understand how precarious employment is changing the nature of the urban and social economic terrain in select Southern Ontario neighborhoods and communities, and how this is impacting particular identifiable populations. Secondly, to explore the connection between the experiences of precarity and the capacity of neighborhoods to respond to it. And then finally, to explore the relationship between changing patterns of employment, people, and the social and economic activities of neighborhoods. So we started with precarious employment. There are various definitions. There's a new there's another definition that was reported in the business section of the Globe and Mail today, referring to what Brian referred to earlier by the TD and the CIBC accounts of precarity, that says that the level of precarity now being experienced will continue until 2017, so they have a definition. Our definition that we used with community researchers is precarious employment is characterized by increased economic insecurity, reduced entitlement, ongoing employment, limited control over work schedules, low pay, limited benefits, and fewer opportunities for career advancement. Isn't this just an enlightening conference? You know, if you weren't depressed before, here you go. So when we asked our community participants to think about this precarious employment and what it was to them, they provided various examples. And this is the one I'll share with you today. And you can see the photo that was taken, and this is what the participants said. The train tracks are representative of my employment and prospects, like a long, desolate, lonely trek with no destination in sight. It is like a treadmill, going fast and working hard, but ending up nowhere. Precarious employment makes having goals, dreams, or even trying to expand one's horizons so difficult. So just as Diane said before, you want to go in and think, there's a lot of resilience, and in fact there is. People are resilient, but the prospects may be less so. So what we found, I'm not going to identify each of these, but I'll flip through here and identify just some of them. Uneven labor market, frequent experiences with temp agencies, uneven work schedules, long hours, vulnerability to cost of living, declining health, food insecurity. These are things that you all know and you're all familiar with, but nonetheless, we wanted to identify what we found when we analyzed what people had to say based on the photos that they took, which was the first phase of this. And gentrification and its impact on affordability of housing. And it continues, changing neighborhood economy, heightened risk to community safety, dilapidated buildings, increased pressure on family life, lack of child care, inability, and this is important, inability to participate in community or collective activities, and this was mentioned already. So, having set up what the study is, and the first phase of the study being the photo voice aspect, I just want to turn to one neighborhood example, and I call this example a seat at the table. Who has a seat at the table? And it reflects one of the areas that we're in Cabbagetown, just east of here. So I want to go back to one of our objectives, and that is to explore the connection between the experiences of precarity and the capacity of neighborhoods to respond to it. The story I tell is in the context of deindustrialization, globalization, and neoliberalization, which was talked about at length in the last panel. Job losses, people meandering the streets rather than occupied in full-time employment. It's a story about who has the right to the city or the neighborhood and how we regulate public space. It challenges us to think clearly about what we think we're doing when we study experiences of precarity and how neighborhoods respond to it. I live in downtown Toronto East, more specifically Cabbagetown, one of the study sites. It's a neighborhood with stark social and economic disparities. It's an area with one of the highest numbers of shelters and social services in the GTA. There is a small gentrified area I refer to as the core of the Cabbage, or COC, that boasts a reputation of having the most continuous standard Victorian housing in all of North America. It's pretty. The core of the Cabbage houses around 7,500 residents, while the outer Cabbage, Regent Park, St. Jamestown, and Moss Park, houses somewhere in the vicinity of 50,000 residents. There's a long history to this area of the city, and I detail that in an article in 2010. But today I want to tell just one story, and very briefly. This story reveals that while it's necessary to do our research, dig up statistics, and hear what people living in neighborhoods have to say, we also must understand the social, political, cultural, and economic influences of the few that drive the changing nature of the neighborhood. And this is a familiar tale told by scholars that we all know, such as Bourdieu and Marx, and a tale that is deeply embedded in relationships of class and race privilege. In 2009, the local BIA introduced a pilot plan to encourage increased retail traffic along Parliament Street, the main and really only significant shopping stretch in the area. They suggested offering permanent seating and tables on 3 street corners. Hardly before the announcement was uttered, residents from the gentrified core Cabbage area were knocking on my door asking me to sign a petition to prevent this pilot project. I refused. Gentrifiers with significant cultural capital mobilized, secured a spot on CBC radio, and convinced not only the BIA to change their minds and cancel the project, but broadcast to the rest of the GTA the continued divide between worthy and unworthy citizens. The fear expressed was that undesirables, those with free time, especially during the day, would occupy and monopolize the permanent seating rather than the seating in turn enhance the business area. In fact, they would threaten the safety of the area and keep shoppers and new business away. Cabbagetown, it was argued, required little public space and instead needed people moving through, not gathering and socializing. Common arguments used in the past to shut down local businesses that serves lower income residents, such as the former Cabbagetown restaurant that OCAP unsuccessfully tried to fight. The swift, laser-sharp mobilizing precision with which gentrifiers mustered and prevented permanent seating on 3 corners was truly a jaw-dropping demonstration of just how effective cultural capital and white power can be. The pilot project was canceled almost as soon as it was announced. People who were not busy with employment were thus marked as dangerous and disruptive to the neighborhood. So if this is in part an aspect of the backdrop of our study, then how do we understand the words and experiences of the participants who are precariously employed when they talk about their struggles to belong, the time they spend chasing after new skills for employment, securing food and adequate and affordable housing, or appropriate services for addiction? How do these competing needs of residents, differently located along the social spectrum, find ways to explore what we have identified as another objective of this study: the relationship between the changing patterns of employment, people, and the social and economic activities of our neighborhoods. And we hope that in analyzing the photo voice stories and examples such as this, in relation to the interviews with community members, small business, and service providers in the second stage of the project, we'll have a better idea about just what we think we're doing. So Grace Edward outlines that building on the data collected through photo voice, the objective was to better understand the impact on precarious employment on livelihoods, the resources available to mitigate its impacts, and the impact on the local business landscape through in-depth interviewing of key participants in the employment process. We hypothesized that small and medium-sized business owners had a particular perspective on the mechanics and logic of precarious employment, and we sought to explore that. Moreover, we were interested in their evaluation of the implications of precarious employment on local economies, given their stake in the power of residents and relationship between stable wages and effective demand. Secondly, we were interested to answer the question: what was the level of consciousness of the conditions and experience of precariously employed workers among small business groups? If they better understood the plight of precariously employed, would they adjust their practice? Were they in a position to adjust their practice, or are they structurally constrained from any adjustment that might mitigate the plight or the precariously employed? So the interviews involved facilitated conversations conducted on a one-to-one basis, and these were based on a survey made up of mostly open-ended questions. From each neighborhood, we sought to recruit 30 interviewees, 10 from business, 10 from service providers, and 10 community members, for a total of 60 per region and 180 for the project in total. The process of recruitment has been more complex than first imagined. While community members and service providers were more readily reachable because of the networks we had established in the first phase, not so for the small and medium business people that we hope to reach. So we therefore split the recruitment and survey administration into two and proceeded with the service providers and community members first. But nevertheless, we have been able to meet our targets with the community members and service providers in the 2 sites in Peel region and achieved close to target in both Hamilton and Toronto as well. We've completed 103 interviews of service providers, so there were 42 in the region of Peel, 34 in Toronto, and 27 in Hamilton. We're now in the process of doing recruitment interviews with small business owners and hope to complete them by the end of April. We've established some contacts with local organizations, with networks that include all these stakeholders, including BIAs, chambers of commerce, community organizations that previously conducted research on small business activities and their contacts. We have made some adjustments to accommodate the small business owners with regard to issues of scheduling and allow them to complete the surveys in some cases. So the next steps, and this is my final statement. We anticipate that the data analysis will be completed sometime in the summer, and then report writing will be completed by the fall, ready for the report to be disseminated through academic venues. And that's our project. Thank you.